All right, that looks like we're good to go. Hi, my name is Ricky Patterson. I am a career development counselor for the University of Wilmington, or University of North Carolina, Wilmington Career Center. I am also a liaison to the College of Health and Human Services. And today we are going to talk about Ask Me Anything applying for med school. We are joined by Leah Moore. Leah, I will go ahead and toss it over to you for introduction.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes. Hi, my name is Leah Moore. I am the Regional Director of Admissions for Trinity School of Medicine, which is a Caribbean-based medical school in St. Vincent. I handle the Mid-Atlantic and East Territory. So Wilmington, UNC Wilmington is one of the schools that I cover. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to answer some questions.
Awesome. There we go. Well, just a reminder for the participants, this is being recorded. And so if you are not comfortable joining in on the conversation via voice or video, we do have a chat feature that you can join in. And so, Leah, if you are ready to go, we'll go ahead and get started with the first question.
Let's go.
All righty. So the first conversation question comes from a student that says, when would you recommend students to take the MCAT?
So really you want to look at it where you want to apply 3 to 6 months, or I'm sorry, take the MCAT 3 to 6 months before you're ready to apply. For US schools, I know most advisors will say June at the latest, preferably by May, if you're looking for a fall application start. I'm sorry, so for a fall start. We at Trinity, we are a little different where we have rolling admissions. We have a January, May, and September time frame. So we always say 3 to 6 months ahead of that start term versus a specific month, which is, US schools are usually more like a June as an absolute deadline to have that MCAT taken.
Okay, so you brought a great perspective to think about with the rolling start dates. So definitely thinking about looking when the actual program is going to start, at what point, what program during the year. And so doing a little bit of research on that, that's a great.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that, no matter when you want to apply, you don't want to apply until you have that MCAT score. Because you can send in an application, you can send in, unofficial transcripts or transcripts, but if a school doesn't have that MCAT, you're really not going to be able to move forward in that admissions process. Every school has an application fee most of the time. So you don't want to spend money, and let's face it, no one wants to spend money where they don't have to spend money. So you want to make sure that, you're using your resources wisely, because depending on what the score comes back, you may have applied to a school that, is not going to accept that, or it's higher and you're no longer interested in the school, depending on what that score comes back at. So you just want to be mindful of waiting until you have that score, just so you're not stretching yourself too thin on the financial side of applications.
Absolutely. It's always nice to think about that.
Right.
So obviously people do have different learning styles, but what would you say were some key learning strategies or key strategies to prepare for the MCAT?
Honestly, I want to say time. This is not something that you can rush. It's an extensive exam, and you really want to make sure that you're giving yourself 4 to 6 months to prepare. You can shorten that maybe a little bit, or go on the 4-month side if you're really not doing a lot of other things. But if you're taking classes and working either full-time or part-time, you want to make sure that you give yourself as much time as possible where you're able to dedicate 4 hours a day, weekends 6 hours a day if you're not busy, to really going over the material. You want to make sure that you're taking those practice exams that are offered, and identifying weaknesses, and then going back and strengthening and finding additional tools to strengthen, weakness that comes back from the test exam. The other thing that I find in just talking to students and asking them, how did you prepare for the MCAT? What did you do? There's lots and lots of tools out there. There are so many tools out there. that you want to make sure that you're finding ones and identifying ones that really work with your learning style and not get too distracted with somebody else coming and said, well, I found this tool and this works great. But if you have to write your information out to learn it, visual aspects or a new visual tool isn't going to necessarily help you, and it causes distractions, and that takes away from the learning that needs to be done to apply to the exam. The other thing that I will say is that it's a long exam. It's a 7-hour piece. So you want to make sure that physically you're prepared for that. What are you going to wear? What are you going to eat? You don't want to have like a new breakfast the day of and it doesn't work for you. It's little things like that as you go through this process, you really want to practice replicating day of, so that you're prepared and there's no surprises for when you go in and sit for the 7 hours.
Absolutely. Always, I think everyone involved with this webinar can agree that food is definitely something to think about, and especially with that 7-hour piece, you gotta think about, gotta be prepared for those.
Right.
So the next question, would you say, with talking to students, obviously this is a big piece for students to think about before they are applying. Would you say that there's an average number of schools that you hear students are applying to? So obviously doing research, but would there be a specific number on kind of a sweet spot that you would recommend, or that you would hear students saying?
Well, I was looking at that, and some of the schools, some of the students that that I work with have applied to as high as 20. If you're in those top percentages as far as your GPA and your MCAT score, you could apply to as few as 3 to 5. According to AMCAS, I did a little bit of digging, and it's basically 16 is an average. But that also will depend on how much money there is to spend on applications, and it's a financial aspect, but you have to think about it too, is right now there aren't in-person visits, but when things return to some type of normal, there will be on-site visits. And so you have to factor in a travel expense, time away from work, preparation time. So all of those factors come into it. So you don't want to go where you're applying to 30 schools financially on an application fee, but then just on the time and preparation, that's taxing and can take away from, the schools that maybe you really, really want to focus on. So that's something definitely to consider. It's not just the application fee part of it, but if you get an interview or you get into that next step, what does that look like on time? If you're in school and working and things like that, you don't want to cause more stress. For us being in the Caribbean, we offer students the opportunity to come to the island, not now, but in normal times, the ability to come to the island and visit, take a look at the housing and the campus, just as any other campus would. And if the students end up matriculating to the school, then we provide a refund or a credit to the tuition for that. So as you're looking at schools, whether it's in the US or outside of the US, it's just something to consider and ask about for visitations, and from a financial aspect, whether or not there's an opportunity to possibly get a credit for some of the travel that you do.
Awesome. And you mentioned AMCAS. For those of you who do not know, that does stand for the American Medical College Application Service. That is run by the Association of American Medical Colleges. So just wanted to talk about that abbreviation a little bit. You did mention.
I live in that world, so I forget.
Yes, I completely here at UNC Wilmington, we love our abbreviations, and so I would assume that colleges and medical schools across the nation and the world also love their abbreviations, but just wanted, yes. And so you did mention this a little bit, and especially in today's world with COVID-19 being such a serious implication, and really can can throw some things off a projected timeline or anything like that. Do you have any knowledge or anything to say for students who are kind of uncertain about possibilities with medical school because of COVID-19? Do you have any, I guess, re-encouraging remarks or anything to think about during this time?
Well, I think, we have our May term starting, in a few weeks. And we are starting on time. We are just doing it virtually as everyone else is. We're having welcome calls and things like that, and addressing everything as best we can. We have online learning systems, and we had a system in place for recording the lectures where students could go back. So we're continuing to start normal, with the hope that we can have students get back to the island in this summer term. June, July is our hope. Obviously that is changing, or we're constantly looking at what's happening in order for that to take place. The other part of that is, I will say that there has not been a drop off for interest for September start and the fall. I think everyone is hoping that and moving forward as if things will be back to some type of normal on campus learning in the September timeframe. With that in mind, I would highly recommend that students take this time to study for MCAT if they haven't taken that already. If you have done MCAT, start just rereading material, going back and looking at a class maybe that you haven't taken in 2 years, going back, looking at the material, refreshing yourself, making flashcards, really keeping your mind and your mindset in a reading and learning type of groove, I guess, simply because if you get out of practice, coming back into med school is going to be a little bit of a jar. Because there's a lot of material and it happens quickly, and it's, you're expected to know how to handle that. So I would just say, take the opportunity of not being distracted as far as going out socially, and take that extra time to study. That doesn't mean that online distractions aren't real. We all know that a new series on Netflix can, derail you for 2 days, but try and get back and take advantage of the time that you have, and study and keep studying.
Absolutely. And I actually have yet to watch any new series. I'm going back to old favorites. So hopefully I can stick with that work ethic. So we'll see. We will see. Well, back to the application process a little bit. What would you say are some key steps to take in the application process? Obviously, it's not something you just decide, okay, I'm going to apply for med school, and it happens the next day. So, what key steps would you talk to students about in their planning and preparation?
Right. So obviously MCAT, we talked about that's a necessity. The other part that you want to make sure that you have available are your grade point average. You want to know what your GPA is, both for overall as well as, your BCPM, making sure that you've got that on the ready. You want to have at least unofficial transcripts available to submit. If you don't have the AMCAS report, full report out, a lot of that is included in there, but that's a process as well, as going in and registering and completing that information. You want to make sure that you have your letters of recommendation on, at least requested, and know when those will be available, to you. We, as an outside of the US school, we require the letters of recommendation to come to us directly from the reference, because we're not able to access those as part of the AMCAS. It's just a little bit of a difference. And it's a little extra step, but it's not usually difficult if they have them already. The other thing that you want to make sure you're doing, and this probably applies to more like sophomore, junior year students, is make sure you've got your clinical experience, you have leadership experience, you have volunteer experience. All of those things play into your application. You want to make sure that your personal statement is there, and really just making yourself having all of the information really at your fingertips, so that if you don't supply it or it's not required in the first step, when the school comes back and says, okay, great, I need this and this to take you to the next level, it's not weeks before you have that back to them, and it keeps everything moving on a much faster process.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you so much. So you talked a little bit about the application materials throughout the process. How do students really stand out with their application materials?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about what we do that's different than others in a minute. But what I always like to say is, just when you're writing your personal statement, be real and be genuine. I've seen some pretty, I want to say, a stretch sometimes between a hobby and medicine, and it becomes, as you're reading and as you read more and you become more familiar, you can see ones that are maybe forced, where they thought just a little bit too much about it. There doesn't always have to be an aha moment in your life that says, that was when I decided to be a doctor. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes I've always been interested, and I took my classes, and then I volunteered here, and I did a shadow here, and it all kind of worked together to determine that yes, this was something I wanted to pursue. I think kind of going back to that application process for me is a clinical experience, volunteer experience stands out more than a research piece, because you're going to be in an environment, a clinical environment, and part of being a physician and being a doctor is giving back. So showcasing that you've had those experiences and have immersed yourself in an environment that you're going to be practicing in is important, as well as just demonstrating, giving back. At Trinity, we are a little bit different in that we take an approach of the entire student. We look at MCAT, we look at GPA, we look at experiences and put that as a collective whole. We don't really view scores as a cutoff. We don't have, if you don't have this number, don't even bother applying kind of mindset. We look at it individually. That said, we do have enough data, and we have tons and tons of data that do showcase that if your GPA is below a certain level, or the MCAT score is below a certain level, you're going to struggle. It just demonstrates that you need more time or another term to get kind of a basic science understanding and build the foundation to take and be successful in your first year of medical school. But there's lots of ways to go about that. And again, because I am from Trinity, we do have a Master's of Science program. So if you come in and you need a little bit of foundation building, you can take a term with us and then matriculate to the MD program. You can do that in a post-bac program here in the States if you were interested in that. But really just making sure, and be real about what your score is, and know and understand maybe why you didn't do well in a semester or two. It just comes across. Authenticity and being genuine comes across in your writing as well as in conversations and in the interview. And it's clear if something is forced. Long-winded answer on that one, but
absolutely. No, I think that's one of the things in terms of when students practice mock interviews with myself and some of the other career counselors here at UNC Wilmington, we always talk about, whenever you're asked a question in an interview process, make sure you're telling the truth, make sure you're not lying and going. And so being real, telling the truth definitely may have been long-winded, but it was definitely full of good and accurate content. So I appreciate that.
It just really is like, when you're in, it's kind of like in a conversation, you can tell when someone is like making a stretch. Don't make a stretch.
Right.
Just be honest. And then it builds on other questions that come out from that. And you can go maybe a little bit deeper into something that is said to get a little bit more detail or background on a particular point.
Absolutely. So moving on, obviously to this, applying for med school is no easy task. Preparing for med school is no easy task, and it can be stressful for some students. And so, do you have any recommendations on how to keep those stress levels down and really keep everything manageable and in check?
Well, I think it goes to what we just talked about and being just honest and real. If you're showcasing your true self, then that's a lot easier to talk about and be relaxed and confident in what you are able to communicate. The other part of that is I'm a person, and if I'm interviewing you for my school, I believe that there's potential for you to attend and get your degree from Trinity. And so I want to come across as informative and educational as I can. So there are some nerves on my part too, and that might be different from other schools, but because we're a Caribbean-based school, we're smaller, people may not have heard of us. Myself and my team, we have a fair amount of education that we do in our interview and follow-up process to make sure that our students and prospective students have a full understanding of what it is that we offer. So there are, I think it's fair to say, maybe some nerves on everyone's part, just because, schools want students to come to them, and they want the best possible students to come to them. So just remember that too, that we're all people. The other thing that I would say is that there's no real expectation for you to be perfect. Medical school is difficult. It's difficult for a reason. And it doesn't matter how well you did in undergraduate programs, you are going to hit a stumbling block at some point in med school. We want to know that you have managed or navigated your way through a difficult time before, whether that's personally, academically, whatever that looks like, that you've showcased that you have the ability to address an issue and come out on top, whatever that looks like. So, people stumble. You're going to need a minute sometimes to think of an answer. That's okay. Can we come back to that? I need to think about that for a minute. Perfect. It's nerve-wracking, and we understand that there are nerves there. The one thing I will say in this particular time frame with the online piece is make sure you have a good background with an online interview. Ricky and I were here a little bit early to make sure the lighting was okay and how did the background look. You want to make sure that you're in a quiet place. You want to make sure that the background is somewhat, just not distracting. If you have to do it in a bedroom because that's where it's quiet, make the bed. Don't have laundry all around. I mean, it sounds little things, but you're going in basically an interview. So it's like you are trailing your laundry behind you if you walked into an office with it all piled up on your bed. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this process, that it's a professional interview, and you want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in that fashion.
Absolutely, yes. It's always, especially in today's culture with the COVID-19 kind of changing everything. It's really something to think about with the backgrounds of what is behind us on the screen and within the camera. And so that's definitely something to think about, that I would say a lot of people didn't really give that much thought until recently. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I will, the next question is, many medical interviews are becoming more and more popular for the interview process. Do you have any recommendations to both students as well as myself and other career counselors. Do you have any recommendations on how to best prepare for those mini medical interviews?
So I do. It's not something that we're doing at Trinity. Again, I think because we take a little bit of a different approach, we interview rather early in the process, look at, the whole student, and not just scores as far as the initial kind of, process. So we're not doing the mini medical interviews. But what I will say, both from a student and an advisor perspective, is make sure that you've got a handle on what's happening in this space. Obviously COVID-19 is huge right now. So have you read the articles, the journals, the findings? You want to make sure you're looking at if you have identified a specific area that you're interested for medicine. Make sure you understand what's going on at a national level within those topics. You want to look at what the school that you're applying to, what are they doing in research? What are they doing around this topic? And make sure that you're up to speed and on that, because my guess is those are going to be types of scenarios that possibly come in. You want to be well versed on what's happening. It showcases that you're not just tunnel on what you are doing and what is happening in your world, but you're staying up to date on what's happening in the medical space, which is obviously going to be very important as you're treating patients, and what's the latest findings and how can that apply to patients. So you want to make sure that you're really up to speed on what's going on in the space in general.
Absolutely. And Leah, are you hearing a little bit of feedback with, can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you fine. I'm not having any feedback at all.
Oh, okay. I can still hear you. There is a little bit of buzzing from your side, but no, so no bumblebees flying around. I don't see any, but
no, and everything is put away and off, so I'm not sure what.
But yes, well, I can still hear you, and so that's. But just wanted to see if it was anything on my end. But if we I can still hear you, and so I can definitely move on to the next question if that works for you.
Yep.
So you are associated with a Caribbean medical school. And so obviously a lot of students are going to think about the different options with med school and with their future. What would you want to say to students about finding the right school for them?
Well, I think when you're looking at, and I'm going to address this just from an international school perspective or an outside of the U.S. School that you want to take a look at. There are three main factors that I want to talk about: accreditation, class size, and clerkships. Those are the key areas where you really want to make sure that you're doing your research. Accreditation is the first one, because you cannot come back into the States and practice medicine if you do not attend an accredited institution outside of the U.S. Trinity is fully accredited. We're CAMHP accredited, going back to our acronyms and abbreviations. So that is on our website, but it's CAMHP accredited, and basically all that means is that we are recognized by the U.S. Department of Education as following the same standards as a U.S. medical school. So our students are able to participate in the match program and come back and practice in all 50 states and Canada. So there's no issue there. You want to make sure that you've got, that you are verifying that as you go through the process, because that's a stopping point if you don't. The other part is class size. So Caribbean-based medical schools do have a tendency to accept a large number of students at the start of each term, up to 500 and starting in each term. And for medical school, you're looking at a lot of material, and that just kind of tends to create a competitive environment for faculty resources, lab resources, things like that. Medical school is also difficult, so if you run into problems, there are going to be, you want to be able to have access to people that can help, or resources that can help. What sets Trinity apart from others is that we do have a very small class size. I think I may have talked about this before, but our 3 terms are January, May, and September. January and May, we have a max of about 45 students, and September is usually between 80 and 100 max for the start term. So that allows our students very individualized learning attention. It allows us to identify any issues with the student academically early on, and access to the faculty and administration and things like that to address an issue early on so that they continue and progress. So that's something, just make sure that you're looking at what the normal size is to come in. And then the last one is clerkships. We follow the same process and program as a U.S. school, where we guarantee our clerkships as part of the general program. So you come to Trinity, you'll go through the first 5 terms on the island, and then 6th term you come back to the States, and you will do your clerkships in either one with 2 locations. So you will do all of your core clerkships about a year in one of those locations, and then you can continue in those locations for electives. That is different in many other Caribbean schools. Require you to find your own, which can cause gaps and delays, and there's stress in finding places to live. We take all of that away. So it's just something to be aware of and ask early in the process what that looks like when you get past the 2 years. How does that work? And these are things that those set us apart, but also just be very mindful and ask those questions early on in the interview process, so you have all the information and you don't come into any surprises after your first term.
Awesome. Absolutely. And so we do have a question from the chat. When students are getting references to think about for the recommendations, what should stand out or help them stand out? Faculty, others in the medical profession, or does it not matter as long as it is a good reference? And so really, I guess, what in terms of letters of recommendation, what makes a good reference?
You want to have someone that has worked with the student at, in a rather extensive level, like going in and doing a shadow for 1 week is not going to carry as much weight as someone coming in and working in that environment for 3 months, a full summer. It can be a clinical experience. It can be a volunteer experience. It's really someone that has a little bit longer term relationship. I feel it just holds a little bit more credibility. The other thing that I would recommend is that you make sure you are, tailoring your information for the school. There are ways to you apply to an MD program or a DO program. And so depending on experience, if you shadowed a DO for 3 months or 2 months or over the course of a semester, obviously that letter is going to hold a lot more weight when you go into a DO program or apply to a DO program. It's important that you are looking at that type of recommendation as well, and you are not sending a DO letter into an MD program. Same with personal statements and things like that. I got a little bit off track on that, but it just reminded me that you do want to make sure that it's applicable to the program that you are applying to. That carries a lot more weight.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Well, if that looks, we've been talking for a little over 30 minutes, and so okay. I'll check the chat one more time, but okay. as of right now, I think that that could be it on the questions. I will say thank you very much. Just on a side of UNC Wilmington, we will be continuing to host different events throughout the week as a part of our virtual career week. We are still taking appointments as well as we are still holding express hours for quick questions about resume, cover letters, etc. But one thing that I would like to add is just open it up to you one more time. If you would like anything add, Leah, about your experience so far with Trinity, or anything that you would like to say so that the UNC Wilmington students can hear. This will be posted to our website, and look for more advertisements about that once everything gets finalized. But Leah, just opening up to you one last time.
Great. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to share information, just from the overall medical school application process, and as well as, a little bit of information on Trinity. I'm excited to actually work with the students and provide them opportunities. Really, my role and what I get most excited about is really making sure that advisors like your team and the students are aware of their options like Trinity, so that if they really do want to pursue a medical degree, they are able to do so in maybe a non-traditional way, or a little bit outside of the box, or what you thought the path was going to be. But we have so many successful students and doctors that are making an impact in the world right now, that it's really it's an exciting opportunity to provide that option for upcoming students. So I appreciate the time very much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Once again, tomorrow, the 22nd of April, we will be hosting a Resumania event that is from 1 to 5. And so if you do have any questions on your resume, you can definitely use that, as well as scheduling an appointment, or lastly, taking advantage of those express hours. And so, Leah, thank you very much. We will follow up eventually, once we get everything posted with the transcription and recording, everything like that. But just wanted to thank you so much, and I will be stopping the recording now. So